Okay, so this time, so I'm very much excited to discuss to you the third module, which is Krashen'S hypothesis on second language acquisition. And this will be uh, discussed in two parts. So for these two parts, I'll be discussing the first two hypotheses, and then the other three will be discussed next meeting. Okay, so let's move on. So let's have first a brief background of who is Stephen Krashen. So Stephen Krashen graduated or studied and at the University of Southern California, who is an expert in the field of linguistics. He is specializing in theories of language acquisition and development, which is very much apparent on the theories that he proposed with regard to SLA, or the second language acquisition. And much of his recent research has involved the study of non-English and bilingual language acquisition, which is also true among us Filipinos, diba? We are also into bilingual language acquisition. We both studied Filipino and in English, and some of us are studying or learning some dialects, considering that our country is multicultural, that makes it multilingual. And since 1980, Stephen Krashen has already published over 100 books and articles and has been invited to deliver over 300 lectures at the different universities throughout the United States and Canada, which really makes Stephen Krashen a famous one when it comes to language acquisition and language learning, specifically on the field of linguistics. So much for that brief background about Stephen Krashen, because the core or the heart and soul of our discussion will be focusing on the different five hypotheses of Krashen's theory of second language acquisition, or the SLA. So these are the five main hypotheses. Again, it's only just hypothesis. When we talk of hypothesis, it means an educated guess. Although it is an educated guess, it is based on theory. It is not just solely based on one's perception of certain things, considering that Krashen became known from this theory. It means that he has already established some significant findings with regard to language acquisition. Okay, so again, although these are hypotheses, it doesn't necessarily that doesn't always mean that it is true to all. Okay. So the first theory is the acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the input hypothesis, the affective filter hypothesis, and the natural order hypothesis. So we will be differentiating all these five hypotheses. What are their common tenets? What are the contents of these theories or of this hypothesis? What made them different from one another? What are their concepts? Okay, so for this afternoon, what we'll be focusing only is or are the acquisition learning hypothesis and monitor hypothesis. So let's have first the acquisition learning hypothesis. So you might be asking, sir, why is it acquisition and why is it learning? So in our previous discussion, we mentioned that language acquisition and language learning are two different entities. They are two different entities wherein when we talk of acquisition, language acquisition, it comes natural. So students or learners or children learn based on where they are exposed to. That comes natural to them. And when we talk of learning, there's certain scaffolding, that there's certain someone who is teaching the child in order for the child to learn the language. But why is it that acquisition is affixed with learning? As far as Krashen's hypothesis is concerned. So according to what I mentioned a while ago, I think I have I have to skip that part. Laging advance ako sa discussion ko sa slide. Okay, I already discussed this slide. Okay. So according to Krashen, language acquisition is a subconscious process. Considering that it's a subconscious process, it means that we are not actually aware that we are already absorbing it. Because if we have that consciousness, we are aware. If it's subconscious, we are not actually aware that we are already um, acquiring something. And when we talk of language acquisition, we are not actually aware that we are already acquiring the language as we interact with others, as we get along with others. Okay, language acquirers, according to Krashen, are not usually aware of the fact that they are acquiring the language, just like what I mentioned, but are only aware of the fact that they are using the language for communication. And when we talk of acquired competence, it is also a subconscious process. The same is true with language acquisition. And learning a certain language, learning a specific language, or acquiring a specific language is already called as an acquired competence. Then growing up, you already learned or you already acquired to you are comfortable of using English language, then that is your acquired competence, and you're not actually aware that you are already using it. So there's also no awareness that the rules of grammar is acquired, diba? But according to Noam Chomsky, if we would like to argue, diba? If we would like to argue with Noam Chomsky, Noam Chomsky believed that the so-called universal grammar, wherein human in general has already this ability to organize the thoughts into words, and that ability to organize the thoughts into words is already an implication of utilizing a grammar rules. But we are not actually aware that we are already following the right grammar. You will notice that among children, they know that if you will be using you, then it should be followed by are. They say you are beautiful, but they could not explain that. But no one taught them that if you will be using you, then the verb should to be used should be are. No one taught them that. It's just that they naturally acquire it. Growing up, if we're just going to apply that if you'll be using Filipino, di ba? Sa pagsasalita ng Filipino, hindi naman natin alam na ganito dapat ang istruktura ng pangungusap natin kapag sinasabi natin, Mama, ibili mo nga ako ng ganito. Mama, gusto ko nga ng gatas. Mama, gusto ko nga kumain. We're not actually aware of how those words were constructed, or how those words were organized into us into a sentence. We don't know actually the system as to how they are arranged. We don't know because according kay Noam Chomsky, we already have that ability to organize words into thoughts that we're not actually aware that we are already organizing it based on a correct grammar structure. So people using the language have a feel of correctness. So when we talk of feel of correctness, it is similar with um, when we are not actually aware of the grammar rule, we're just guessing. It sounds good. Okay. You are. Sounds good. Okay, itong tamang sagot. Di ba when you are when you are answering subject-verb agreement, ang ginagawa nyo lang is that meron lang kayong gut feel. It sounds correct. It sounds correct. Sabi nyo, okay, this must be the correct answer. So, although you're not aware of you don't know the rules, but still, nandun lang yung, it sounds good. Kaya nga sabi rito, di ba? Grammatical sentences sound right or feel right, and errors feel wrong, even if we do not consciously know what rule was violated. Basta alam lang natin na tama siya. Pero if we're just going to ask, why is it correct? And why this one is incorrect? Why is it we use are if we use the pronoun you? Why is it that if we use it, we use is? Why is it that we add If the noun is plural, we add s, and if the verb is singular, we do not we add s. We don't know the rule. It's just that we felt or we feel that it is correct. Okay, so that's what's happening during the language acquisition. Okay, that is happening in language acquisition. Yung basta alam mo lang na tama yung sinasabi mo, basta alam mo lang na tama yung pangungusap mo, ginagawa mo. Kaya na-mention nga ito na-mention nga rin ni Noam Chomsky, di ba? About the truth value. Parents are always after with the truth value or the truth about what or the truth about the context of what their children is saying or are saying. So yun yung tinatawag natin truth value. Okay. So according to Krashen, language acquisition is it is an implicit learning. Okay? Ayun, ginamit niyo yung term na terminal learning. Meaning to say, pag sinabi natin implicit, okay, it comes along. Kung ano yung nandiyan sa environment mo, yun yung magagamit mo. Yun yung natututunan mo. Hence, ginamit niya yung term na learning. Okay? Sabi niya, when he defined learning, it is not the learning that we technically define. The learning that we know that as teachers, di ba, when we talk of learning, it is something that someone taught us to know that particular thing. There is a process of knowing how we know it because someone taught us how to know it. Okay? It is different from Krashen's point of view that when he thought of learning, it is something to do with how you learn, you yourself, how you learn based on how you experience it, based on how you expose yourself from others, or based on how you what call this, you immerse yourself with other people. Kaya sinasabi niya, Rick, it is an informal learning. Hence, when we talk of formal learning, of course, we are pertaining to you go to school or someone is teaching you to learn that specific language or someone is teaching you, then we call it formal learning. And he also called language acquisition as a natural learning, just like what we mentioned to you a while ago, that the environment where you are exposed to is something that really influences you to how you become, specifically when we talk of language, on how you learned of that specific language. It's because of the environment that where you are exposed to. And that kind of environment that where you are exposed to has something to do with the natural learning. Okay? In non-technical language, acquisition is picking up a language. Kapag narinig mo na sinabi niya yon, you pick it up. And then, kapag paulit-ulit mo lang naririnig yon, di ka nila tinuturuan eh. Di ka naman, wala na magtuturo sa'yo, pero you keep on hearing that those kind of words, those sentence construction from other people, then with using our brain, which has the ability to organize thoughts and ideas, lumalabas at lumalabas yun sa bibig natin. Hence, we call it language acquisition. That makes language acquisition an implicit learning, an informal learning, and a natural learning. These three terms are actually related to one another. Yung pagiging implicit, informal, and natural. Okay. Now, ito yung language learning according kay Krashen. Let's dig deeper into that. So sabi niya, learning here is defined as conscious knowledge of a second language. Okay? Yan yung alam nating learning. Alam natin na nag-aaral tayo. Alam natin na kaya natin inaaral kasi kaya natin matutunan. Yan yung learning na alam natin. Sabi ni Krashen. We know the rules. If they're pertaining to language, we know the grammar rules. And we are aware of the rules. And we are able to talk about them. But in non-technical terms, according kay Krashen, the learning that Krashen is emphasizing in acquisition learning hypothesis. Again, in acquisition learning hypothesis, in non-technical terms, this is what Krashen is trying to point out. It's only just an operational definition. for Krashen. So sabi niya, learning is knowing about a language known to most people as grammar or rules, formal knowledge of a language, or explicit learning. Okay? Ito yung binabanggit ko sa inyo kanina na parang sinasabi natin is a simple term as we learn from our own experience. Okay? So, language acquisition versus language learning vis-a-vis children and versus adult. Tingnan natin ano bang pinagkaiba ng language acquisition at language learning kapag pinag-usapan naman natin ngayon ang children at ang adult. So sabi niya, language acquisition is an implicit knowledge while language learning is explicit knowledge. Again, when we talk of implicit knowledge, we're not aware na natututunan natin. Pag sinabi na explicit knowledge, aware tayo na natututo tayo. So, sabi nila, children acquire language while adult learns the language. Okay, so parang hina-hypothesize ni Stephen Krashen na yung mga bata, they naturally learns the language. Hence, they naturally acquire the language. Which is unlike kapag tayo adult na raw, we learn the language. Ano kayang gusto nyong patukuyan dito? Because as an adult, we have now the matured mind. And we now have that consciousness that if let's say we would like to learn that language, mag-aaralan natin. Pero yung mga bata, even though they're not learning it, na-acquire nila yun. Kaya nga diba, doon sa behaviorism, sinasabi natin na kung ano yung nakalakhang manner of speaking ng bata, nakalakhang lingwahe ng bata, yun yung magiging lingwahe niya rin habang siya ay tumatanda o lumalaki. I'm watching a Thai drama kanina lang while waiting for you. And then yung main character doon, ang characterization niya, siya ay may pagkapalengkera kasi nga lumaki siya sa Islam, yung squatter area. Doon siya lumaki. At yung mga nakapaligid sa kanyang mga tao ay mga laging nagsisigawan, laging nag-aaway, talagang yung mga bibig ay blubber-mouthed sila. So, sa bahay nila, ganun din yung kanyang nanay. Blubber-mouthed din yung nanay niya. Yung mga kaibigan niya, blubber-mouthed. Yung mga kapitbahay niya, blubber-mouthed. So, in short, yung bidang artista, yung bidang character na yon doon sa Thai drama na pinapanood ko, ganun din siya. Nung lumaki siya, blubber-mouthed din siya. Okay, so yun yung sinasabi natin na mayroong acquisition na nangyayari doon sa bata. Pero sa mga adult daw, sabi ni Stephen Krashen, again, this is all just a hypothesis, ang mga adult, I think it's because of their mature mind, when they would like to know other languages, sila raw ay nag-aaral talaga ng language. Okay? Nag-aaral. So sa kanila, they learn the language for adult. Pero di ba nga, merong assumption, may sinabi sino ba to? Si Noam Chomsky about may statement siya na it becomes difficult for an adult to learn a language, 'di ba? Meron siyang ganong sinabi na kapag adult ka na raw pala, may tendency kang mahirapan pang mag-aral. But if we're just going to oppose that as to how Piaget mentioned to us, na if you have that matured mind, kasi nga develop na ang brain mo, mas matututo ka raw ng language. You really see kung paano nag-oppose yung mga theories na to pag pinag-aaralan natin yung language acquisition. Pero yung point of view ni Stephen Krashen na ang adult ay matututo sila ng language ay almost similar, or not almost similar, but we can associate on what JJ said na kapag mature na yung utak ng bata, mas matututo sila. Kasi nga doon, di ba, sa level of stages or sa stages na pinopose ni PJ. So, moving on. But But Krashen does not totally debunk the idea that adult also acquires language. Okay, adult also acquires language. Kaya nga 'di ba yung isa sa mga examples natin yung nakaraan about yung uh, uh, pumunta sila sa isang lugar na kung saan ay yung mga wala silang choice but to study the Dutch language because that's the only way that they can communicate with others. Mga adult na sila. Pero nagkaroon ng Creole, nagkaroon ng pigeonization, kung tawagin natin. So, because of their interactions with others, they are already adult. They're not learning the language, but it comes natural to them na matutuhan nila yung Dutch na language yung dun sa ating previous example, di ba? So why? Because they have this ability to pick up language which does not appear at their puberty age. So however, this does not mean that adults will always be able to achieve native-like levels in a second language. So no matter sabi niya pa rin, no matter, let's say for example, if you are not a native speaker of that particular language, then more likely hindi mo na-achieve pa rin yung native-like levels in a second language. Kahit tayo mga Pilipino, di ba? Although we are using English as our second language, although lumalabas pa rin talaga yung pagiging neutral tone natin. And that neutral tone, what makes the Filipino accent a Filipino accent in terms of world English. Yes, yung neutral tone natin. Pero ang gagaling ng mga Pilipino na mag-imitate ang iba't ibang mga tone, di ba? So, moving on, in addition to language acquisition and acquisition learning hypothesis, okay, adults can access the same natural language acquisition device or the LAD or the LAD that children use. Okay, so error correction has little or no effect on subconscious acquisition in language acquisition, but is thought to be useful for conscious learning. So we again mentioned of the language acquisition device, and when we talk of language acquisition device, again, we are pertaining to how we process a certain language in order for us to know that specific language. So we call it the language acquisition device. Our ability to utilize that specific language. So ang error correction daw has little or no effect on subconscious acquisition when we are pertaining to language acquisition. Bakit? Okay. So again, when we talk of error correction, nangyayari ito kapag halimbawa ay kapag mayroon tayong sinasabi at yung construction ng ating sentence ay may mali. Tapos, tinatama tayo. Okay? Pero mayroon daw pagkakataon na halimbawa kapag ikaw ay nandoon sa proseso ng language acquisition, ito ay teorya lamang, there's only just a little or no effect on subconscious acquisition. Kasi ang tendency nga natin, lalo pat kapag ikaw ay bata, lalo na yung mga parents ay nasa truth value. Again, when we talk of truth value, we are pertaining to the context only. So, yung konteksto lang ng sinasabi ng bata, okay na sa parents, basta nagkakaunawaan sila. So, kaya sinasabi na isa yun sa mga dahilan din kung bakit natin sinasabi na ang error correction has no or little effect on subconscious acquisition. Kapag halimbawa ay nakatatak na yun dyan sa bata, ay kailangan na rin itama, pero may pagkakataon na yung mga bata ay hindi talaga nila nauunawa kung bakit mali ang kanilang sinasabi. Kasi mamaya doon sa ating discussion sa monitoring hypothesis, doon kasi sa monitoring hypothesis, lalabas doon kung anong level tayo ng pagpo-correct sa sarili natin. Magkakaugnay-ugnay kasi ang mga hypothesis ni Krashen. Pero sinasabi ni Krashen dito, sa language learning, since aware ka na pinag-aaralan mo yun at gusto mong matuto, mas open ka sa correction. Hindi ka tulad sa subconscious acquisition na kahit sabihin sa iyo na mali yung pagkakaano mo, mali yung sinasabi mo, may tendency talaga ang iilan o karamihan na hindi nila absorb yung pagko-correct mo sa kanila. Kasi kumbaga, sa term nga natin is wala silang pakialam. Basta sinasabi nila, gusto nilang sabihin. Maliman, aware man sila o hindi man sila aware sa sinasabi nila. Kapag tinama mo sila, wala silang pakialam. Kaya sinasabi na yung error correction talaga has little or no effect. Okay? Pero sa language learning, kasi nga nandun yung kagustuhan mo matuto, kapag kinorek ka, i-absorb mo. Okay? Kasi aware ka na nag-aaral ka ng language niyo. So, kaya yun yung difference or effect, difference on the effect of error correction. I'm sure that you could relate to it na tinatama ka na pero parang hindi mo ina-absorb kasi nga hindi ka talaga totally aware o hindi ka talaga particular sa mga ganong bagay. Pero kapag ikaw, halimbawa, ay nag-aaral ka ng grammar at may nag-correct sa iyo, ina-absorb mo kasi alam mo sa sarili mo na nag-aaral ka, gusto mong matutunan. Okay, that's the difference in terms of the effect of error correction. Kakasunod pa ba tayo? So, let's look at now what other researchers say about the error correction. So, it is clear whether error correction has this impact in actual practice. So that this, according to Fancello and Long, and according to the study of Brown, Cazden, and Bellugi, so evidence from child language acquisition confirms that error correction does not influence acquisition to any great extent. So, kumbaga, itong study na to nila Brown, nila Cazden, nila Bellugi affirms doon sa sinasabi ni Stephen Krashen with regard to error correction. Okay. Ito yung binabanggit ko sa inyo kanina pa about truth value kasi na-introduce rin ang truth value it was also introduced by Noam Chomsky in some of his discussion. So, in acquisition learning hypothesis, parents attend far more to the truth value of what the child is saying rather than to the form. Ito yung paulit-ulit kong binabanggit sa inyo, nandun lang sila sa konteksto ng sinasabi ng bata. At hindi nila ito tinatama. Basta ang mahalaga ay nagkakaunawaan sila at nauunawaan sila ng bata. Halimbawa, the focus on the truth value, a child said, her curl, my hair. The parent did not correct the child because it is true that the parent is curling the hair of the child. But if you will be particular with the sentence construction, her curl my hair, alam nating mali. Kasi iba yung function ng pronoun her. Diba? So, hindi, dapat ang gagamitin mong pronoun dyan ay subjective. So, she. Tapos ang verb mo, dahil nga singular pronoun ang gamit mo, dapat ang gagamitin mong verb ay singular verb. She curls my hair. Pero yung parent, hindi na niya tinama kasi naintindihan niya ang gustong sabihin ng bata. Which is yun naman talaga ang konteksto ng gustong sabihin ng bata na yung nanay niya, kinukulot yung buhok niya. So, the focus now here, let's see the difference. Okay, the focus now here is on the form. So sabi, a child said, Walt Disney comes on Tuesday. The mother said, no, honey, Walt Disney comes on Wednesday. So the parent corrected the child. So medyo, when it comes to grammar, tama naman yung pagkakasabi ng bata. But when it comes to context, doon tinama nung nanay. Okay? So it's on Tuesday. Ay, not on Tuesday, but on Wednesday. So ngayon, ano yung implications nito sa language acquisition? Anong ibig sabihin nito? Kapag hindi natin tinatama yung bata, madadala nila yun. Yun na naman gustong sabihin dito ni Krashen'S sa acquisition learning. Okay, na kapag yung bata, hindi mo siya, kapag nandun ka lang, nakafocus ka lang doon sa truth value, doon lang sa konteksto ng sinasabi nila, at kahit alam natin or baka hindi rin aware yung parents or yung guardians na may mali. Isipin ng bata na tama yung sinasabi niya. Okay? In Brown, Cazden, and Bellugi, so Brown et al. Conclude that it seems to be truth value rather than syntactic well-formedness, so that chiefly governs explicit verbal reinforcement by parents, so which renders mildly paradoxical the fact that the usual product of such a training schedule is an adult whose speech is highly grammatical but not notably truthful. So if the training of the adult to the child is really more of grammatical, more of correcting the form, not only just correcting the accuracy of what the child is saying, mas maganda yung acquisition, mas positive ang acquisition doon sa bata, mas maganda yung learning ng bata on that aspect alone. Okay? So, diyan papasok ngayon yung point of view ni Krashen ng learning eh. Okay? Bagaman bagaman hindi naman ganun kapormal yung pagtuturo mo sa bata, pero kapag yung bata lagi mong reinforce na ito ang tama, yung bata siguro subconsciously ma-acquire niya yon at tama rin yung ma-acquire niya at mako-correct niya yung sinasabi niya. Okay, so if we're just going to sum up again what the acquisition learning hypothesis would like to emphasize to us is it only just tells us the process on how a child learns the language, on how a child acquires the language. Wherein learning for Krashen, when we talk of the language learning hypothesis, is more of an experience that helps the child, that molds a child into someone who is really knowledgeable of that particular language. So, and also he gives emphasis on the difference between as to how an adult and a child learn and acquire language. Sabi niya, based on his hypothesis, a child is more of acquisition and an adult is more of learning. But he did not disclose the proposition that an adult can also acquire the language in such a way that in succeeding hypothesis, i-justify niya na the more matured a human being is or a person is, the more that he will acquire language, the more that he will learn a specific language. Sa mga succeeding hypothesis, dun niya ngayon yan hihimay-himayin. Okay? So that is the overall concept of acquisition, learning, hypothesis. And also take note of the truth value. Okay? Again, truth value, if the parents, sa input hypothesis, makikita natin yung importansya ng sinasabi kong syntactic well-formedness na kailangan sa mga parents sa input hypothesis. Okay? So, now, let's proceed on the monitor hypothesis. Dito na ngayon papasok kung paano tayo magkaroon ng tinatawag natin self-correction, kung paano tayo correct ng ibang tao, at kung anong level ba kayo as a monitor. Okay? So, nagiging biroan to ng former students ko, yung monitor hypothesis eh. Tingnan natin kung bakit nila kapag sila nag-uusap-usap dito. Kasi yung iba, di ba, meron kayong mga kaibigan na lagi kayong tinatama. Kapag may sinabi ka, iko-correct ka nila. Diba, mali ang grammar mo, iko-correct ka nila. So, anong level ka kaya pagdating sa monitor hypothesis? Tingnan natin. So, while the acquisition learning distinction claims that two separate processes coexist in the adult, it does not state how they are used in second language performance. Again, acquisition learning distinction claims that these two separate processes coexist in the adult. But this time, in the monitor hypothesis, it posits that acquisition and learning are used in very specific ways. So normally, acquisition initiates our utterances in a second language and is responsible for our fluency. So, bakit siya naging responsible for our fluency? Kapag maganda yung environment natin at talagang they are very much fluent when using that language, maganda yung fluency natin. Kapag hindi naman gano'n kaganda yung environment na kinalakan natin at hindi sila gano'n kabiyasa pa sa paggamit ng language na yun na gusto natin mapag-aralan, na gusto natin ma-acquire, more likely ay ganun din ang iyong magiging resulta sa iyo. So learning has only one function and that is as a monitor. According to Krashen, makita kayo na sa atin na that the only function of learning is monitor or editor. So learning comes into play only to make changes in the form of our appearance after it has been produced by the acquired system. So the monitor hypothesis implies that formal rules or conscious learning play only a very limited role in second language performance. So dito ngayon lalabas yung mga kaibigan mong sinasabihan mo na ay lagi ka na lang kino-correct sa mga sinasabi mo. Konting mali mo lang, okay, ganito dapat ang gamitin mong word, ganito dapat ang gamitin mong verb. Ganito dapat. So although sometimes we felt offended, di ba, kapag kino-correct kayo lagi. Pero looking at the brighter side of that, you learn from them. Okay? So there are 3 conditions in monitoring. Okay? So first is time. Second is focus on form, and then third is knowing the rules. So sa time, normal conversation does not allow enough time to think about and use rules. Let's say for example in casual conversation, di ba? In casual conversation, we just say whatever we want to say. Let's say for instance in my case, I do not have a script on how am I going to deliver everything that I will be telling here in front of you. Although I do have my slide presentation, but if you're just going to listen, there are some instances that I do commit mistakes when it comes to my sentence construction because I do not have a script that I will be reading in order for me to deliver my lines perfectly. The same is true in normal conversation, diba? When we are talking to your friends, oftentimes you don't mind kung tama na ba yung structure ng sentence mo. Even us, Filipinos, even we're using Filipino language, you will notice that we do not use the term correctly. Okay? We do not use the term correctly. And mali talaga yung grammar natin minsan. Or madalas pa nga, di ba? Kung sino pa yung mga native speakers, sila pa yung mga nagkakamali. The same way with the Americans, although Americans, they are native English speakers, but there are some instances that they too are not following the right rules. Okay, so especially during the normal conversations or casual conversation. Okay, so that is if we are after with the time. Again, if we are monitoring, let's consider the time. If you would like to correct someone, let's consider the time in casual conversation na in toto yun eh. There are really some instances that you forgot a word, you forgot the rule, you're just flabbergasted by your the thing that comes into your mind. Lahat na sinasabi mo without you thinking of the rules already. Okay? So, then secondly is focus on form. Be involved in what we are saying, that we do not attend to how we are saying it. Okay, so it is pertaining to the construction of your sentence, the choice of words, the manner of delivery, I think, and also the context of what you're saying. Know the rule. Even the best students do not learn every rule they are exposed to. Okay. So these are the different considerations or even conditions when you are monitoring. So we see the natural order for grammatical morphemes, that is the child's difficulty order when we test subjects in situations that appear to be monitor free, where they are focused on communication and not form. So you will notice that among children, if they will be saying something, let's say they are speaking English, but no one is correcting, it's just that they just absorb what they watch from YouTube, and they will be copying the sentence structure in YouTube. What if mali yung napapanood nila sa YouTube ng mga videos? So, walang nagko-correct sa kanila, walang nagmo-monitor sa kanila, or what we call the monitor free. And their focus is more of just on communication. When they would like to say something to you, then they will just say it in English because that's what they absorb when they are watching videos. Okay? Or for example, yung kanilang guard o kanilang yung nagtuturo sa ano yung kasama nila sa bahay ay pamali-mali rin talaga. At yun yung laging kausap ng bata. Okay? So, walang nagko-correct, walang monitor free eh. Kapag natin natin monitor free, walang nagko-correct. So, mali rin yung observe ng mga bata. So, when acquirers or learners have time and are focused on the form and know the rule, the error pattern changes, reflecting the contribution of the conscious grammar. So, let's say, for example, yung bata, let's say, learners have time, let's say may time yung bata to conceptualize things, yung gusto niyong sabihin. Let's say, how he or she will be saying it to her parents when the child would like to ask for something. At pinaghandaan niya kung paano niya sasabihin. Again, because of the element of time. So, and since the child is particular of the form and particular of the rules applied in grammar, you can really see from them that there is an error pattern changes. Okay, what is that error pattern changes? That error pattern changes is from, let's say, maraming mali, napabawasan yung mga mali. Wherein, if we're just going to get into that, if we're going to analyze that, it now contribute on the conscious grammar. So, parang di bang ano na, di ba, acquisition tas naging learning, di ba? From acquisition to learning. Okay? So, the use of the conscious monitor thus has the effect of allowing performers to supply items that are not yet acquired. So, halimbawa, US sila ng US. U is beautiful. And then someone correct din, anak, it should be R. You are. So kapag merong nag-monitor sa kanila at kinokorrect sila na you are ng you are, so paulit-ulit, again, the repetition is very much important. So it allowed the performers to supply items that are not yet acquired. So since hindi pa nila na-acquired na you are pala dapat yun, so ngayon may nag-suffice sa kanya na dapat it should be you are, not you is. So, nako-correct yung bata. Hence, making the child more knowledgeable of using that particular language. Again, ang focus natin dito is yung pagtatama sa monitor hypothesis. Monitor use results in the rise in rank of items that are late acquired in the natural order. Kasi meron tayong tinatawag ng natural order hypothesis eh. So, siguro late sa next meeting natin, i-emphasize ano ba yung natural order hypothesis na yan. So, items that the performance has learned but has not acquired. Okay? Ito yung halimbawa, US sila ng US beautiful. Ito yung naging, later on, natutunan nila you are, na pala dapat yon. Yung tinatawag natin late acquired. At ang nakatulong sa kanila doon para nila ma-acquire yun, although it is late, is because of their monitors. These monitors, it could be their parents, it could be their guardians, or anyone, any people surrounding the child. Sila yung mga monitors. So ito yung iba't ibang uri ng mga monitors. There are type of performers in monitoring. Alin kaya kayo rito? Monitor over users, monitor under users, the optimal monitor users. So you can now classify kung anong klaseng monitors ang mga kaibigan ninyo kapag tinatama kayo. Sila ba'y over user, under user, or optimal monitor users? So let's differentiate them. Ang monitor over users, so these are people who attempt to monitor all the time. So, lagi ka na lang pinocorrect. So, kada salita mo, lagi siya may correction. Performers who are constantly checking their output with their conscious knowledge of the second language. So as a result, such performers may speak hesitantly. I'm sure that you could relate to it na kapag kasama mo yung kaibigan mo na lagi ka nang kino-correct. Minsan, hesitant ka na lang magsalita, baka mamaya may mali kang masabi, itatama ka na naman. Often, self-correct in the middle of utterances. Being monitored over users can also be applied to yourself. Yung tatawag natin self-correction. So, if you're overuser sa sarili mo, at least you become more conscious na mali ka na sa sinasabi mo, and then right away you are correcting yourself and are so concerned with correctness that they cannot speak with any real fluency. Kaya nga lang, may advantage at disadvantage ang pagiging overuser mo sa iba at pagiging overuser mo, monitor overuser mo sa sarili mo. Ang advantage ng monitor overuser sa kasama mo na lagi mong kinokorek is that natutulungan mo siyang itama. Kaya nga lang, at disadvantage, nawawala ng self-confidence yung kasama mo, yung kaibigan mo. Kaya naging hesitant na siya ngayon sa sinasabi niya. Now, ang advantage naman na pagiging monitor overuser sa sarili mo is that you're conscious of your grammar. You're conscious of what you will say. However, kapag monitor overuser ka sa sarili mo, nagiging super conscious ka na sa sasabihin mo. Na tama ba itong sasabihin ko o mali itong sasabihin ko? To the point na para ka ng robot. Na para ka ng, tama pa ba yung sinasabi ko? Na every time you say something, nagiging may tendency ka na rin na maging hesitant na sa sinasabi mo kasi nga, overuser ka sa sarili mo. Monitor overuser ka. Okay? So, ano kaya kayo? Mamaya tatanungin ko kayo kung alin kayo doon. So, ano naman yung monitor underusers? So, these are performers who have not learned, or if they have learned, prefer not to use their conscious knowledge even when conditions allow it. Yung parang ikaw yung tipo ng kaibigan na gusto mo nang itama pero pinipigilan mo yung sarili mo. Wag na lang itama. Pero gusto mo siyang, alam mong may mali, pero parang wala kang pakialam. Sige, hindi ko na lang siya itatama. Okay? So, underusers are typically uninfluenced by error correction. Yung parang, kahit mali na, sige nga, bahala ka, hindi na kita itatama. Ganon ka. So, kaya uninfluenced by error correction. So, kapag ikaw naman sa sarili mo, minsan, kapag na-deliver mo na, ikaw rin mismo sa sarili mo, hindi mo na tinatama sa sarili mo. Kahit parang alam mo na may mali sa sinabi mo. Basta you let it go. So, kaya sinasabi rito, they can self-correct only by using a feel or correctness. Yung it sounds right. And rely completely on the acquired system. So, yung completely on the acquired system, mayroong danger dyan. Paano kung yung acquired system mo, hindi naman ganong ka-legit yung pagkaka-acquired mo doon sa na-acquire mong language system na na-acquire mo, hindi naman ganong ka-legit yun. So, magiging mali pa rin yung iyong sasabihin. Okay? So again, among underusers, sila yung alam mo nilang mali, pero hindi na lang nila itatama. Sa sarili nila, alam nilang mali, pero hindi nila ma-pinpoint, bakit nga ba mali? Pero alam ko mali eh. Kasi nga, underusers sila. So sila yung mga alam na mali, pero hindi nila alam na, bakit kaya mali? Sige, hindi ko na lang siya itatama, hindi ko naman alam kung bakit siya mali. Basta mali. So, nakarelay ka lang doon sa acquired system mo. Paano nga, sabi nga natin, kung hindi legit yung acquired system mo at hindi ganong kalalim yung acquisition mo doon sa pinag-aaralan ng language, then more likely ay hindi ganun ka-confident sa sasabihin mo. Okay? So, ano naman ang optimal monitor user? So, our pedagogical goal is to produce optimal users. Again, pedagogical goal. Pero ito ko pedagogical goal, it is yung pagtuturo, pedagogy, di ba, something to do with teaching, pedagogy. So, in language learning, in language acquisition, there should be the right pedagogy or the appropriate pedagogy. And as mentioned, the pedagogical goal is to produce optimal users. Performers who use the monitor when it is appropriate and when it does not interfere with communication. So kumbaga, alam mong mali, pero not almost of the time you're correcting them. Parang may nasabi siyang mali at na-correct mo na, hindi kayong paulit-ulit mo na siyang tinatama kasi nagiging overuser ka na. Ito ay sakto lang. Alam mo kung kailan siya dapat itama, alam mo kung kailan siya hindi dapat itama. So, because what you are after with is you do not want to interfere the communication, and optimal users can therefore use their learned competence as a supplement to their acquired competence. So, ito yung tinatawag nating user. Okay? Sila yung mga linulugar lang kung kailan ba dapat sila magtama sa isang tao. Okay? So, hindi yung katulad ng monitor over user na lagi ka na lang kinuha. Sobrahan naman sa pagiging concerned sa'yo. Hindi mo alam kung concern sa'yo o baka ano lang galing-galingan. Yung other user naman, alam nang mali, pero hindi niya naman alam kung bakit mali. No? So siya parang sa mga friends mo, siya yung parang wala siyang pakialam. Pero ang mas may concern sa'yo, itong si monitor user. So dinulugar niya. So nalagay niya na, okay, ito pala dapat, kailangan ko siyang itama. Okay? So, halimbawa, it could be, you are among circles of your friends. Ikaw yung bida-bida, ikaw salta ng salita. Tapos, yung isa mong kasama ay may narinig na mali doon sa sinabi mo. Let's say, sa pagkakagamit mo ng language. So siya, hindi kanya kinorek agad kasi baka mapahiya ka doon sa mga circle of friends mo kapag kinorek ka niya right away. So, linulugar niya. So, pwede ang gawin niya, kausapin niya right after sa kanya i-correct. Parang kapag tayo ay nasa loob ng classroom at kinorek tayo ng teacher natin, dapat meron tayong tinatawag na conscious learning. As a teacher, di ba, meron tayong tinatawag na conscious learning. At kapag kinorek tayo in front of the class ng ating teacher, we should be aware na it's an optimal monitor user, yung teacher natin. Kasi dinulugar niya at sa tamang lugar siya at trabaho ng teacher na itama ka doon sa maling sinabi mo sa klase. So, optimal monitor user ang application doon. Okay? So, nasa lugar yung pagko-correct. So, I think that ends the first part of our discussion of the hypothesis. So next meeting we'll be continuing the other three hypotheses, the input hypothesis and the natural order hypothesis. Okay, and the other one, I forgot the other one. Basta there are 5 hypotheses. So again, those are the 5 or the first 2 hypotheses as Stephen Krashen is concerned.